So when you can't work the audio, you get 2 rounds of applause. It's really wonderful. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much. I'm Benjamin Freud. I'm the head of Upper School, as has been introduced, and I'm going to talk to you about emergent learning. I actually could have put any word right here in terms of learning, because actually the word that I'm interested in is emergence. I'm interested in the word emergence, but because we're at school, I'm going to bring up learning. But I'm also going to challenge you to reconceptualize learning in such a way as to have it be connected with doing. This idea that learning and doing are the same thing. We only separate them because of language. But every time that we learn, we do, and every time that we do, we learn. It is a simultaneous process because we are alive. And everything alive learns and does at the same time because of the way we interact or interact with our environment. So I'm just going to introduce myself. I know I've already been introduced, but I'm Benjamin Freud. I'm originally from France. I've lived in 10 countries since 1989, where I left France at the age of 15. Probably last 16 out of the last 20 years in Asia, or Asia-esque. Got a Ph.D. in history, that's my passion. Education, I've got an MBA in international relations. These are my kids and my family, and the reason I'm bringing them here is because they have a huge impact on who I am and how I think and what I do. Nico here has graduated last year. He's doing a gap year here in Bali. Alexia here playing soccer, which she does 9 times a week. Thank you very much, 9 times a week. Oh. But she loves it, and she's very much part of my life, as is my wife Charlotte, who's sitting over there. They're part of me, and I'm part of them. They are my environment. They form me. I do not exist. Everything that I say and think is a result of the experiences that I've had, and probably well before that. A quick rundown. Head of Upper School. It's my first year here at Green School Bali. We also have a fledgling consultancy that really is more about opening spaces for conversation through our writing, through our podcasting, called Coconut Thinking. You're welcome to look it up, www.coconut-thinking.com. That's my plug, but again, it's just articles. And I started my career in consulting. I started my career in consulting in Silicon Valley in the late 90s, which is when we were building Web 1.0. This is when Yahoo had just gone public. Companies were setting up B2B businesses to help companies build websites. It's that long ago. I'm aging myself. But it was really cool because I was 23 or something like that. And the people that I was interacting with were 27, and they were trying to change the world. And they were changing the world, and they did change the world. And that's had a big influence on me. So the rest, as you can see, I've taught anywhere from grade 3 to university. But what I want to talk to you about today is emergent learning. Now again, this word learning can be replaced. It's really the emergence that I want to connect with. But the learning piece might also be quite relevant simply because it's the way we approach the world, as the world, with the world. And so what I'd like you to think about today is really this idea that they're indistinguishable. And when we talk about learning, we're learning and we're doing at the same time. We cannot learn without doing. Just the simple act of breathing, being, existing, interacting, relating, connecting is doing, and we learn at the same time. By the time you're done with this morning, your cells will have replenished themselves. You will have replaced many of the cells. After about 7 or 10 years, your whole body's different. There's the whole story about Theseus in ancient Greece, who had a boat, he had a ship, and they replaced all the parts one by one by one by one, whereas after X amount of years, a few decades, there were none of the original parts, but it was still Theseus' ship. And that's kind of how we are in terms of how we are with the world and in our physical body. This idea that we're connected to the whole, how we learn and what we do as and with our environment. This is really important. This idea that we are disconnected from the whole, from the universe, is a false binary. Now, I know this sounds like woo-woo stuff, and we're in Bali, and you're used to hearing people with beads and crystal bowls telling you how we're all connected. But what we're going to talk about today is actually grounded in physics. It's actually grounded in biology. And we're going to talk about stuff that I have no idea what I'm talking about. I have no idea. But I'm in good company because Richard Feynman, one of the prominent quantum physicists in the 1950s, said, if you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics. So if it's good enough for him to be not understanding of it, then I think I'm okay with saying that we're just going to touch on these ideas. We're also going to talk about, and I'd like you to think about the difference between emergence and determinism. And that's quite key to this story, because this is all about stories. And most importantly, this idea that emergence might be a word that's popping up. Maybe it's not, I'm not too sure, but it's nothing new. That's key, it is nothing new. And very lastly, and this is why I put it in bold, I would love for us to consider new stories with new voices. And we'll get to that in a bit. Now, I want to say one thing. Every image that's here, other than the photographs, are computer generated by AI. Now, 9 months ago, you would have been probably impressed. Now you're just rolling your eyes and it doesn't really matter. And I get that. And that's, tomorrow is the anniversary of when ChatGPT came out, went public. So tomorrow's actually quite a big day. Well, how much life has changed in 364 days? But the reason I did the computer-generated images is because this was me creating a presentation of emergence. I put in a prompt, and the images that came out of it, I did not have control over. I kind of guided it, but I didn't have control over it. And this popped up when I said I wanted food art, whatever, blurry background, but I put in some donuts. I had no control over this, and these emerged. Now this was with a machine, but in all life at all levels, at the cellular level to the whole entire universe, is a story of emergence. I brought up donuts here because we're also going to talk about donut economics. And what I'd really like to emphasize here is when we think about donut economics, we talk about planetary boundaries and we talk about crises of climate and so forth. We might fall into the trap, and it was just brought up, that it's a tech solution that we need. I'm willing to say that the climate crisis is actually a symptom rather than anything else. It's a symptom of the way that we connect with the world, or even better, that we don't connect with the world, even though we are connected with the world because we're not separate from the world. That anything that we talk about when it comes to production, transportation, logistics, consumption, changing our behavior patterns won't happen unless we have a new approach to how we bring on the world. Literally bring forth the world through our actions, through learning and through doing. And that's what's going to make the critical difference. And donut economics is one entry point, but there's many others. And that's where we're going to talk about emergence. I'm just going to pop this up. I know a lot of people here know about systems thinking. I just want to kind of channel that conversation. There's nothing I brought up here. I brought it straight from Fritjof Capra, who is world-renowned physicist. He wrote Tao of Physics, systems thinker. He's done some amazing things. And I just want to bring up a couple of things. This is literally his bullet points in his book. So I went straight as unsurgically as possible. But the parts here that I like to talk about, everything that he brings in about systems thinking is what I like to bring up. And I'd specifically like to talk about this one right here, measuring to mapping, and as well as quantities to qualities. And I might even play around with this idea of structures to processes, just to kind of highlight and move where we are. But I told you we're going to talk about stories. We're going to talk about the stories that we tell. We're going to talk about the stories that we live and the stories that we create. We're going to talk about the fact that our paradigms, the way we approach the world, the way we think about the world, are based on stories. And here, in this, we've got the opportunity to move from a mechanistic way of thinking, a Cartesian, Newtonian way of thinking, and move towards more of a life-centered approach. Not human-centric, life-centered. We put life at the center of everything we do, and that changes and shifts based on our perspective. Putting life at the center doesn't mean actually putting life at the center in many ways. It means everything's at the center because you think about life. And so I bring up these two dudes as we move through history, René Descartes and Isaac Newton. And these are thinkers of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution. But there's something that they did that really shifted the way all of humanity approaches the world. Everybody has heard of I think, therefore I am, which separated the mind from the body in terms of our approach to the world. And of course, Newton, by inventing calculus and by talking about gravity, created this idea of determinism. And this idea of Newtonian physics that, force is equal to mass times acceleration, and if you push something, it's got two different forces, and it's going to move, and an object, all of these things mean that we have approached the world in mathematical ways, in quantitative ways. And a contemporary of Newton, a guy by the name of Lassalle, a French mathematician, philosopher, he said that if you had a demon who was intelligent enough to know and to be able to process the position and movement of all objects in the universe, he could probably 1 million years from now figure out where everything is going to be because of determinism. It's this idea of you hit a cue ball, it hits little billiard balls, and you kind of figure out where the angle is based on the force. That is the machine thinking that we are currently in. And that is why we think of these ideas of cause and effect. This is another guy who's maybe a little bit less well known, but if you know about scientific management, he's going to be the guy. He's Frederick Winslow Taylor. He's brought up this idea of Taylorism, which is, if you remember the Charlie Chaplin, you might not remember, but you might have seen it, the Charlie Chaplin movie where he's on the assembly line and he's trying to catch up, and I know I Love Lucy had the exact same one. It's this idea that you can get a worker to do some very efficient moves, always the same moves, and if you reduce the number of moves or the amount of time it does to create each move, you create more efficient workers. And this is the idea that we think about efficiencies. And we live in a world of efficiency, the vocabulary we use. Words like performance, words like optimization, words like efficiency, even GDP, all of these things are based on this idea of linear growth and efficiencies. We're going to try to maybe challenge that. And I'd like to challenge that by going backwards in time, probably 3.8 billion years when life appeared or emerged on this planet. And maybe even further, 13.8 billion years with the Big Bang. Because the story that I like to tell is one that life emerges, and the emergence of life is something that happens because there is nothing deterministic about life. We are not machines. And so, if this is as old as life itself, it's something that we've probably forgotten. And this affects donut economics because it is the way we approach the world, the way we bring forth the world. And this word regeneration, it's been like popping around everywhere. And Charlotte and I laughed a lot about there was greenwashing, there was going to be teal washing. If you look up Coca-Cola and regeneration, you will find a webpage. The word regeneration is something that's thrown around. We feel good about it, we use it, but how we understand it is very complex. It's as complex as life itself. I'm going to bound it and say that regeneration is about honoring the emergence of all life, honoring the unique expression of all life. It's just the one that I have. But it is in this vein that it has to be something that is connected to life and circularity. But I'm going to start with a story to kind of illustrate where we're going here with emergent learning and how we don't live in this deterministic world. And this kind of affects how we are at Green School and the learning experiences we have at Green School. And this is a computer-generated image of Budapest. And in 2019, Charlotte, Nico, and Alexi and I, we did something during the summer. We went from Edinburgh in Scotland all the way down to Sofia in Bulgaria with our backpacks and on trains. And we left for 7 months, and it was 7 weeks, what am I saying? And it was an amazing experience. My kids grew a lot. It was really wonderful to see that happen. But I'll always remember when we're in Budapest. I love history. I'd never been to Budapest, and I was really impressed by the size of the buildings. They were enormous buildings, blocks, so powerful. And I don't know anything about architecture. I'm just not into architecture, but it was impressive to me because of, the Habsburg Empire and Austro-Hungarian Empire and all that nerdy stuff. And I looked to Nico, who back then was 13, and I said, oh my gosh, isn't it cool that it's all so big? What do you think of this? And as you can imagine, his reaction as a 13-year-old was to just completely ignore me and huff. And I was all excited. It was a big disappointment for me. But I brought you here. Don't you want to share this? But he didn't care one bit. But a couple days later, he came and he told me, you know what's really funny is that in all these countries we've been in, from Scotland to England to Wales to France, and everybody shares social experiences around drink. And the drinks might be different, but we all come together around drink. And isn't that funny that all these cafes are open at street level and that we have social experiences on drink? And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Actually, that makes a lot of sense. And for you to have picked that up tells me a lot. I didn't do anything to teach him this. I wanted to pick him up on the architecture. All I did was create the space, this experience, for him to be able to connect with what we were doing and come up with his own learning. His learning emerged from the conditions that I created. In a school, this is a lot about what we do. We create conditions. We create conditions for the learning to emerge rather than have deterministic ways, because we cannot have control over the learning. That was really impressive for me as an experience to know that he was picking things up that I was not in control and certainly couldn't measure. Couldn't measure that. And of course, most of the stuff that we do learn is in our subconscious, which is another conversation. So what I want to talk to you today is about the language of life and how it's all about relationships. And it's more than just the fact that it's all about relationships, we're all connected. I love the woo-woo, don't get me wrong, but I'm also going to talk about this in terms of quantum physics, in terms of the biology that we are. Our bodies have probably anywhere from twice as many to some people think 10 times as many little critters living on inside as part of us. Our feet sweat because it attracts bacteria that eat other bacteria that provide protection against infection. God only knows what's going on in our stomachs. In our eyebrows right now, there's lots of little critters eating little things. We are an ecosystem into ourselves. Our bodies don't stop where our skin stops. And we cannot live without air and nutrients. And we are the nutrients that we take in. And this is where it connects to donut economics. It is more than just the global boundaries. It is also about our approach to the world. And so this idea of quantum physics, we're just going to go over it very quickly here. I just want to bring up one idea of the fact that in quantum physics is the theory that has been the most successfully proven every single time it happens. And people say, well, what's quantum physics? It's just a way of looking at the world, of understanding the world that we can't understand. We're talking about electrons that go from point A to point B without going in the middle. They just suddenly appear here. We're talking about you can shoot off a photon in one direction and a million miles away shoot a photon in the other direction, and they're connected. One will spin up, the other one will spin down every single time. It's called entanglement. And the photons, electrons, molecules, all of this, there's an entanglement, which means that they react differently no matter where the distance is, faster than the speed of light, which is why Einstein was so uncomfortable with quantum physics. But if we take this back to 13.8 years ago, when we were at that little point before time at the Big Bang, and at that point, we were all entangled. Every atom, every subatomic particle in the universe is entangled because we were 13.8 billion years ago at that one point. And so because we're entangled, our human eyes see differently from animal eyes. But we are animals, right? So I'm making that distinction that I shouldn't make. But the non-human eyes, the other than human. If we were dogs, we would see the world differently. If we were birds, we would see in 4 primary colors. And that shapes our reality. And actually, the way our eyes are constructed, we don't actually look for things. We look for differences or things that are unexpected. I see a background, you see a background, but what you notice is the unexpected. Because you're programmed to think this way, probably because back then you had to look for lions and bears and all that stuff. So we actually kind of make cuts into reality with our perception of the world that is not the whole world. And this is where emergence comes in. I'm going to briefly talk about this part because this is a biological or biology issue. It's about structural coupling. That you change with your environment and your environment changes with you every single time. Right now, this experience is shaped by the fact that it's hot. I'm really hot. I don't know about you guys. There's no breeze here. There's certain lights that are on me. There's this mic, and I'm used to actually having a wireless. There's the fact that you might be comfortable or uncomfortable in the chair. There's the sounds that we hear. Nothing that is happening here is an experience that could be replicated. And this is why life emerges, because the whole environment creates the experiences for us, and we have no control over it, which is different from a deterministic idea that if we do this, then we do that, like a computer algorithm. Our brains are not computers. And I can't think of a better example than Cleopatra. This idea, this thing that we heard as kids of how different would the world be if Cleopatra's nose wasn't so beautiful. How might the entire history of the world change were her nose not to be so beautiful? Because were it not to be so beautiful, her things, maybe there wouldn't have been Julius Caesar falling in love and Mark Antony, and there wouldn't have been this and there wouldn't have been that. Who knows where history would have gone. And this is, of course, more than just a European view of history. It would have spilled into other aspects of the entire course of humankind and animal kind, because we are animals. So I'm going to kind of shift back to this idea of machines and how we think of the world as a machine. We're kind of taught to do this from a young age because of this idea of efficiency. We're kind of taught to think that if I do this, then this will happen. This cause and effect narrative that we hear. It's always in our system. If I do this, this will happen. Cause and effect. I gotta say, even a lot of times, problem solutions. This linearity of the way we exist, when the world isn't like that, because we, as living organisms, as living systems, which includes this school and every other organization, we're complex systems. And we are intelligible, but we're not predictable. We cannot predict anything, but we can understand it if we look at it from a qualitative point of view. There are certain things that we can play around with numbers. Numbers are important, but we can't leave ourselves to be stuck with only numbers. There's a qualitative aspect, maybe even post-qualitative, that we can think about when it comes to understanding and making the world intelligible. To understand something, you don't need to be able to predict it. You just need to look for patterns. Because if we take a Carl Jungian way of approaching how we are with the world, it's actually about more than just thinking. Remember Descartes, how he talked about, I think therefore I am? It's more than thinking. We think, we feel, we sense, we intuit. And thinking is the only one that's linear. But the sensing, the intuiting, and the feeling is when you bring in kind of that right brain, that right hemisphere. And it's a lot more than the left hemisphere that we're so used to having to be dominant. Those other ways, and feeling is not linear, nor is sensing or intuiting. And I bring up the numbers because this guy, Werner Heisenberg, he said that what we observe is not nature, but nature in our form of questioning. The questions that we pose give us different answers. The questions that we pose give us different answers, and therefore different conclusions. And so what we're looking at isn't actually reality, it's how we approach reality. The stories that we start off with, the perspectives we have, the lenses we have. The idea that we can reverse climate change and also biodiversity loss and all that by approaching it a single way, by approaching in a way that if we do this, then this will happen, is not going to be part of that systems thinking that is so important. The questions that we pose are so vital. Anybody ever play that game, 20 questions? They've done tests where people have played that game without having an animal in mind and have just gone through, depending on the animal emerges based on the questions that are posed. It's a little bit that kind of sense. And so this brings us back to emergence, which is really effectively the creation of novelty. And this novelty is qualitatively different from the phenomena from which they emerged. So what does this mean? It means that when we approach the world understanding that we are connected to our environment, and by environment I don't mean, of course, just like the leaves and trees, but everything that's around us, the whole universe. What comes up is the fact that all of us, in the way we interact brings forth the world in different ways. Our actions, our thinking, our learning, our doing bring forth the world that we want or don't want. It doesn't really matter. There's a conscious and subconscious way of moving forward that happen. And when we think about the world in terms of quantum physics, that we're all entangled, or even if you want to think about it in terms of fractals, what we do here resonates with everywhere else in the world because of the concept of fractals. And when it comes to learning, because we're at a school, I'm just going to take a plug for this to try to get us away from some of these traditional ways of thinking about learning. Learning, because we are alive, comes from the inside. We think about the world like a tree oftentimes. It's called the arboreal way. And a tree, in many ways, you've got the roots and then the trunk and then the branches and the leaves. That's a very linear way of thinking, even though you might have different leaves. It's again, they bifurcate, they change at certain points. You get a leaf. It's a very linear way. But maybe we could think about the world more like a bamboo rhizome. A bamboo rhizome has no beginning, has no end, and it pops up everywhere, and it's connected to a whole bunch of other things. Never mind the fact that the bamboo rhizome needs all the fungus and the bacteria and the soil in order to live. A tree does as well, don't get me wrong. But this is quite a powerful image. Because learning comes from the inside, just like life grows from the inside. You need the right amount of water, the right amount of bacteria, the right amount of soil, the light. All of these things really matter. But learning happens and growth happens from the inside. So you can't force a kid to learn anything. You can't say, if I teach you this, you're going to learn it, and I'm going to test you on it, and I'm going to get this outcome. That doesn't make any sense, because that's not how learning happens. Because when we think about the way living systems are, the environment can poke you, it can stimulate you, it can push you, but it cannot control you. So all these kids who are working on these books and doing this linear thing with these similar outcomes actually is a mechanistic way of thinking. It's a Newtonian Cartesian way of thinking, but it's not one that is reflected in the way life emerges. These outcomes that we have, if we go back to Werner Heisenberg, it's not reality. It's reality based on our way of questioning. Or learning happens from the inside, just like Nico, my son, learned about coffee shops from the inside. And so, oh, yeah, got the right one. So really, the world happens, it brings forth because of this expression that we've all heard. The whole is more than the sum of the parts. Because the parts are all nested in the whole. And what happens here in terms of our intra-action, I didn't say interaction because we're all connected. The whole emerges from that. Bigger things emerge from that. This school emerges from that. Bali emerges from that. If we look at it, think about it in systems, education. Maybe more than education, the future emerges. The past also emerges from the present. As we bring the past back. As Faulkner said, the past isn't finished or done. It is yet to happen. I'm misquoting, but you understand. The stories that we tell now create the past. And this also is quantum physics, by the way. They've changed some of the experiments that they've had, and they've actually had the experiment results change based on what they've observed. It's very, very odd stuff. So the properties themselves are novel. It's a sense that they're not present in the part. They emerge from the specific relationships. And this is where we connect together with donut economics, that it's not what we will do individually. We have to do it together because the parts are more, the sum of the parts are going to be the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so emergence is one of the hallmarks of life. I really, I tripped out on this image because it came and it surprised me when I put in a prompt, but I think it's this idea that the heart and brain, we got to stop the severing of our heads. Thinking is the most important, because the way we feel, the way we experience learning, doing in our bodies matters tremendously. The way we connect as social fields matters tremendously. And again, I'm going to bring this back up to this notion that it is in quantum physics that there are fields between us, fields of energy. Energy forms matter, and matter can be converted back into energy. So the question I ask you then is, what matters? What matters? If the energy that we put in forms matter, what matters? And how can we make what matters matter? In a deterministic world of Newton, and this is why I love this idea of cue balls, you do something. You hit a cue ball, it goes into the pocket. And we all did this in math class in high school, but that's not the way the world works. This is a misrepresentation of the way the world works. It might work at the meta level, the macro level. Yeah, you could probably use Newtonian physics in a way to figure out the way the world works and make some good predictions, but it doesn't work at a subparticle level, and it certainly doesn't work at the level of the emergence of life. We can never determine what people will do, what life will do. It cannot happen. The system is well too complex, and this goes back to donut economics. And here's the kicker. In a deterministic Newtonian Cartesian world, there's no creativity. It is impossible to have creativity when the world is determined. It's not fate and free will. It is the fact that there's no creativity. Life brings about creativity because life is always seeking to be creative. It always seeks to evolve. It doesn't evolve like the Wild West where it can just be anything, and there's a certain realm of possibilities or probabilities that it can evolve in. But that's how we work, within a certain bound. But it is always reaching for novelty and creativity. With emergence, history plays an important role in the future, and it's uncertain. And that uncertainty is the heart of creativity. And we should be okay with uncertainty because it's not a bad word. Just don't know. So how can we respond to the world in order maybe perhaps to channel that energy into what matters? And so I'm going to bring back down to earth a little bit. I'm going to bring back down to maybe something you can use, because sometimes you hear these talks and they're all like, oh, no, that's nice, but what can I actually use for it? But I'm going to try to bring it back down to something that hopefully might change the way we all approach the world together. And I'm going to bring this up, this idea that the world that we live in really is about spotlighting stuff. We're spotlighting all the time. Not just these spotlights that are making you hot, but I'm talking about what we notice. The things that are important to us. And I'm going to challenge you by saying that when we tell stories, which is all we do in the world, we only tell stories, we're actually participating in an exclusionary experience. Telling stories is not inclusive, it is exclusive. We exclude when we tell stories. And this is where our ethics really, really matter. Because we have to make choices about who, what, where, when to exclude. Now, I get it, most of the time, those exclusions are subconscious, we don't mean harm. I'm not saying we mean harm, but who are we excluding? There is no story that can bring in all voices. All voices of the human world, the other than human world, the more than human world. It cannot happen because the universe is all entangled and there's an infinite number of possible voices. And the voices that we hear and the voices whose stories we tell, we make that choice in the way we make cuts in the entanglement of reality. So we're just spotlighting what's important to us. How can we live with these ethical decisions of excluding certain voices? We all want to be inclusive, that's fantastic, but we can't do that. We will always leave someone behind. And that's a heavy weight. That's a responsibility, and I spell that word response-ability that we need to live with. And so these blind spots that we have, we can kind of shine the spotlight somewhere else, but that creates more blind spots. And here's the kicker, is that we don't see what we don't see, and what we don't see doesn't exist. And what we should be doing is thinking about where do we want to have that light. Very quickly, I don't teach world history. In fact, nobody teaches world history other than K-12 schools and universities. That's certainly gone. We talk about global history. Because world history, as we remember it, is the story of kings, governors, princes, and people who look like me. So what about the voice of the voiceless? The peasantry, indigenous peoples, the animal world. We are animals, so I'm including us in that. Nobody teaches world history anymore. It's all global history because of the exclusionary process and how we live with that. So I'm going to invite you to talk about bringing different voices here, which connects us to donut economics because of the way we are connected with the world. The stories that we tell are important, the voices that we include are important, the voices that we exclude are also important. So I'm going to invite you to rewrite stories and do that amongst yourselves. But because you seem like, pretty cool Green School crowd, I'm going to invite you to do it in a way where stories emerge from the past in different ways. And when we're used to telling stories, we kind of center on the human, we kind of talk about this or that in the environment. And I'm going to invite you to maybe have an experience that you've done, maybe last weekend, maybe what you did last weekend, last year, it doesn't matter to me, but to tell it from a different voice, not from the voice of your kid or your partner or whatever, but maybe tell the story from the voice of the natural world. I'll give you an example. We were tubing not too far from here, about 10-15 minutes, and there was the three of us, and it was cold, and we went out tubing, and I could tell that story. Yeah, we were tubing, and Charlotte was with me, and we went with Pat Kenny, and it was great. That's a story told from the human point of view. What if I told that story from the river's point of view? What if the river had a story to tell? A story to tell of people going on, having fun, litter being thrown there. What if I told a story of the animals who are looking down at the people? What are they doing? What are they doing with their river tube? What if I told a story from the point of view of the plastic bottle that was thrown? What if I told a story from the dirt and the erosion that was caused because of our tubing? And how might those stories impact the choices we make and the ethics that we have when we not just empathize with the more than human world, but actually bring in those voices and matter those voices, mattering the stories of the river, mattering the stories of the bacteria, mattering the stories of the earthworm, mattering the stories of air. What would happen? What might happen if we mattered stories from the more than human world? And how might that change the way we bring forth the world and allow us to be and thrive and flourish within those planetary boundaries? So I'm going to give you, because this is what teachers do, and it makes everybody feel uncomfortable, but I'm going to do it anyway, because it's good for you, it's good for me. I'm going to give you 1 good minute to think about this. What story, what experience have you had, and how might you tell that story from a non-human voice? And how might that story be told differently? I'm going to give you a hard minute to think inside, quiet. Come back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Minute's a long time, isn't it? Oops. If you could turn to a partner, a friend, a stranger, and share those stories for, let's give it 5 minutes if you turn to someone. 5 minutes of talking, sharing back and forth, listening. Listening is the very important part here. Listening with 2 ears. And really feeling that story. 5 minutes. What might that be? Okay.
First of all, sorry for I don't know speaking English very well. Okay, we explain. I did a book. I don't know if you know Couple times. I did a book 3 times. Each time I come back to the book, in some way I feel it's about looking able to live
the whole neighborhood that they come back, really swim, eat, live, breathe. Yeah, that's like one thing.
I never understanding what the guy is telling about the difficult I'm trying to feel the way the other feel that talking about people for all around. Yeah, I think that sometimes I come myself and see another guy. Maybe
non-human. So this non-human becomes material or animal. So I thought it's a lot easier to show this from the animal perspective versus from the chair perspective. So that's why I thought like maybe this story is the most simple.
I tend to put only on the shoes of other people.
But in theory, or you explain
all the
my
stuff
background, materials,
beautiful one.
now what I
You realize that it's not just life is not about people all around.
I saw it just very so I'm trying to find stories very simple, like from my perspective. Yesterday,
2 more minutes.
thunders were starting to come. It was thundering. I think it was thundering on the mountains. And I went to the beach to have a walk, and I was just waiting for the rain to come. And I was kind of trying to guess, is it gonna rain now? Should I go back home now? Which I did go back home, and then I think an hour later it started to rain. And I think everyone has been talking about how it's been so dry, the rain hasn't happened, and I was waiting for it. The perspective of the rain. The rain is always I want to rain. I can. Something is off. We're trying to do the clouds, the plants, trying very hard to make it rain. It's taken much more time I guess.
1 more minute.
It's beautiful because very beautiful. Yeah, because everything is connected. Other part doesn't happen well, which
Let's come back in 5, 4,
beautiful.
3, 2, 1. Oh, I love my teacher tricks. Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to ask, was anybody like to talk a bit about what happened? How are those stories different, if anybody would like to share?
Got an extra mic? Yeah. There we go.
I was thinking I spend 98% of my time watching my kids do sports, or driving to the sports. So I was thinking of watching Leo play football. I know he plays with Alexia. And then I wondered what it would be like to be the pitch, and is the grass happy about the kids playing on it? Is it upset that it's stomping on it? You know, and then I was turning, to Charlotte and saying that I was doing that, and she was thinking of the exact same thing, coincidentally, of Alexia playing sports and what the pitch was like and what the grass was like. And I was wondering if it was a good, if it was I would think it would be a happy thing if I was a tree and a kid came to climb on me. I think I'd be happier than a non-tree without kids climbing on it. And I was feeling like that grass should be kind of happy, but I suppose it could also be super annoyed that it was turning to dust with all the kids stomping on it. So that was sort of how I was thinking about what I was thinking about.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, weirdly, we were thinking about the grass in similar ways, but also different. And so I was thinking along the lines of all the litter that I see on the football pitch, and I keep meaning to bring like a bag and some pickers, and while the kids are playing football, go around the pitch and clear it off. And how the grass might feel having bottles and wrappers and plastic entangled in it, and perhaps killing all the little bugs or the insects, that are living in the grass, or how it's damaging the soil as it gets squashed into the grass, perhaps affecting the nutrients that are growing there. So, and I was also thinking about when we lived in Saudi Arabia and how we would go out into the desert and we'd get the Arabic rugs out and we would sit down, and the local people would say, don't put the rug on the grass, put the rug on the sand, because to them the grass was so precious because they didn't have as much of it. And so I'm also thinking about a field of research that is emerging, and it's called grass blindness. And the idea here is that grass is everywhere, and we kind of assume, we take it for granted. The soils, the grass, the habitat it provides for so many different creatures. And that because of that, it's much easier to cut it down. Or we were also talking about the sort of astroturf that is placed on the soil, which suffocates the soil and takes away habitats for so many species that live in soil. But we do that because we want to be efficient with how we use our time and how we might mow the lawns. So all these narratives of progress again. And so, yeah, we, took this small idea of the kids playing football and off we went into lots of different tangents, which was, pretty interesting.
I think as you were saying that, the assumption is that the grass doesn't want the plastic on it. But why should it care? It's not doing it any harm. And when I go to that pitch, I see all the trash there, and nearly all that trash is ceremony trash, right? So it's local Balinese going to the ceremony and dropping a load of trash. And I think we rather project our views and saying, well, we don't like that. And we think it's really terrible. But the grass may not care. Some of the local Balinese might not care about the trash being on the floor. And I think there's rather a lot of assumptions that there is definitely the right way of thinking. And what if you thought that it wasn't bad to have trash on the floor? We don't like the way it looks. But who cares? What if it just stays there? It's not going to kill anyone. I don't think it's doing any damage to anyone's health. Maybe it does when it goes into the rivers and forms microplastics and we eat it. But even then, some of the medical community is saying it just passes through the body without harming your health in any way. So starting to think about things from the point of view of the grass and other folk, I was conscious that I was projecting my biases onto those things. I was assuming that trash was bad and that the grass didn't want it, but maybe it liked it, And so then when I started thinking that, I thought, I'm going to kick this bottle off the chair, and then from now on I think I'm just going to throw the trash on the floor.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I was saying the opposite. I was talking about the waste that I've been seeing in Bali, and the connection with nature, because everybody wants to live in Bali, everybody wants to be here, but at the same time, how we balance in this place that is very unbalanced. So we see a lot of motorcycles and cars and carbon emissions. And what is our role here, making something about that? Because it's not about who matters. I think it's comproved that waste is a problem that we have. It goes to the ocean, it goes to landfills, and we have a lot of damage. But I think it is about what would nature would say if they had voice. And I'm thinking about many buildings here now in Bali, everybody construction, and are nature happy with that, with many people here, or not? Just thinking,
Thank you. I'm going to bring it back to donuts. Tasty, tasty donuts. I hope we can start thinking about some of these things, these different points of view. I mean, actually, when you think about it, it makes a lot more sense to throw a banana peel by the window, out the window, than it does to probably do anything else. It goes back into the earth. So I don't know if I'll start doing that, but at least conceptually it is that. I really want to thank you for your time. I really want to thank you for your ears, for your attentiveness. And again, as we talk about donut economics, I will invite you to approach this idea of living within planetary boundaries from the point of view of not just the systems, but the way that we're all connected. And again, going back to the fact that it's about physics and chemistry and history and all this good stuff, but also about the fact that there's a certain lack of control here. However, we still have the ability to channel energy into things that matter. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. Really, really awesome concepts. Lovely to have you here with us. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I would like to open the floor for questions. If you have, we have, I think, space for 1 or 2 questions. If anyone has, Allison.
Thank you for that. I took this parenting course years ago, and the woman said if you can teach your kids one thing only, it's empathy, because it exists in your marriage, on the playground, in your workplace, everything. And I think that's something, as we think about putting our kids maybe in high school or whatever here in green school, it's a difference that I see here is that there's this real strong sense of social responsibility and how would the grass feel. And I feel, it's more of a statement rather than a question, but I do feel like coming from this place, and call it emotional intelligence or empathy or whatever we're trying to foster in their kids, is how they resonate with certain, educational threads and how they find their passion. And it's not memorization, but that is something so important to me as I look to the future of what I want for them. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
From Benjamin to Benjamin.
Hi, Benjamin. So, the question for me is, as far as I can see, mainly the educational paradigm is still deep-rooted in that mechanical paradigm of separation, based on competition. And how, you as an educator, how do you feel we can shift the education system in a way, in order to integrate the principle of interconnectedness that you have talked about? Because to me, this is a paradigm shift. How can we, do you agree with me? And if yes, how can we achieve this paradigm shift?
So that's the question that I've been grappling for many, many years. And I've been doing it in terms of writing, in terms of podcasting. I've got a podcast with about, 80, 85 people on it. And some pretty interesting people. Nora Bateson, Bayo Akamalafe, Daniel Christian Wall. These are people that have taken the podcast away from its original seeds, which were about education, more into the world of regeneration and warm data and connections and interactions, because they're inseparable. This idea of paradigm shifts is more than just necessary, but it's also more than just education. Before my kids told me that having hashtags was really lame, I used to have a hashtag called Beyond School. Because moving beyond schools that are so boxed and they're hermetic little things I don't see outside, we need to move beyond it and connect with the world outside. I'm so happy that Luke here and I, we co-teach a class on eco-entrepreneurship. We've got a teacher and an impact investor shoulder to shoulder with the students, with the young learners, about creating that learning experience. It's going beyond school where the teacher has this idea. That doesn't answer your question, because the paradigm shift is just well more than school. It's an entire paradigm shift. We can be super cynical and think that actually schools just prepare kids to be good little soldiers in the army of capitalism. And I'm not saying, there's many different kinds of capitalism. I'm not sweeping all capitalism with one brush. There's many different kinds of capitalism. There's also, capitalism doesn't have to be violently extracted. Social capitalism. There's just different isms that we can throw out there. But this idea of preparing kids to be compliant, kids who succeed based on following certain algorithms, and I've taught in different curricula, and that's what you do. You follow an algorithm, you get a good grade. It teaches compliance. We live in a system, of course, it's not just the fact that the kids are put in rows and all this industrial stuff, but it's so deeply rooted, and the system tells you the story that you have to get good grades in order to succeed, or you will live under a bridge. That is a story that we tell one another. And that's a story of power. Not that we have power, our relationships are power. Power is a relational, contextual experience. It's not something that we own. But we give power We don't actually give it, but that power, we allow it to flow within that narrative of get good grades, go to Harvard, otherwise you'll be a bum. So it's one that I've been really grappling with, and I have to say that there's a lot of pessimism in me in terms of what it is. However, I overcome that through the historian, knowing that it's a long game. We won't change it in 2023, 2024. It's a longer game. The things are continuously moving and shifting and changing. Nothing stays the same, and there will be inevitable shifts. But, like with every revolutionary movement, it always starts at the fringes. It doesn't start at government. It doesn't start at the systems of government. It might start at the fringes. In Green School, let's face it, is at the fringe. So one of the reasons I joined Green School, one of the reasons I was excited here, and one of the things I told them when I interviewed was the fact that Green School had that marketing, brand, beacon, weight, whatever you want in the world, that it could project itself and say, hey, it's okay to be different. It's okay to do things differently, and we're going to take you with us. We're all going to come together collectively, not in a spirit of competition among international schools, but in terms of the constellation and cooperation. And we're going to do it differently. And you do your thing with your exams. That's cool, but we're going to do our thing. And hopefully, little by little, those ripples become waves and the waves become tsunamis. And it's just going to take a while. And it is a paradigm shift. But we're not stuck in this paradigm. That's not going to last forever. The planet's going to burn out before then.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. I really, really appreciate it. Now the million-dollar question: how do we scale this? How do we scale emergent learning and teaching kids to care more about each other, the relationship we have with the natural world and the environment?
So that's a good question, and I know you talk a lot about scaling, and I'm going to kind of shift it into an and, right? And this idea that because no experience can be replicated because it's about the interaction between ourselves, wherever that boundary ends, and our environment, we can't scale so much as we can spread. And this idea of spreading of emergent learning is really about realizing that it's okay, like being okay with not having control. When Luke and I teach, I gotta tell you, we don't know where this lesson's gonna go. And I know that would be like a fireable offense in many schools, but we let it happen because of that interaction with the kids and how it goes and the questions they pose and where we go and where their businesses are and bringing in that creativity. And it's gonna end up beautiful. But we know where we're going to, where we're going to go. So how do we scale this emergent learning? We just have to be okay. We just have to be okay with just letting it sit. Letting the happiness sit, the joy sit, the pain sit. A love of learning will lead to outcomes. You just have to be okay with letting life go. And that's an approach to life that I think is critical for donut economics. Just let life go within a certain set of boundaries, which need to be determined based on the thriving of all life, which is regeneration.
That's a fantastic way to end. Big round of applause. Thank you so much.